Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Good day, everybody. Hello, and thank you so much for being here with us. We have what I consider to be a very powerful conversation. Picture this: it's 10 p.m., your neck hurts, you're stressed out, you're replying to emails of all things, trying to catch up with that inbox monster. Or, Randall, tell me if this has ever happened. You're supposed to be spending time with your loved ones, watching a movie, but instead you're kind of trying to hide your cell phone on your side with one eye on it, replying, trying to catch up with messages rather than spending that real quality time with your family. Randall,
Oh yeah,
boundaries
my
are
wife.
issues for all of us, no?
I said yes. My wife's gotten wise to that one. There are issues for all of. It's not how. It's not if it's happened. It's how many times has it happened this month.
There we go. Moment of truth, right? It with boundaries issues as creatives, as hardworking people, as educators, whatever our fields are, boundaries come up all the time. And I certainly know that they do for me. So, Randall, thank you for agreeing to be my counselor today and having a therapy session with me.
It's my honor. Just make sure you sign the informed consent.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will now. I see. This is more the traditional psychotherapy, which I know what this is not about. So let's come back and have a conversation. And
No
this is the value we want to bring to everybody today. So first of all, welcome all of you. Love all the activity happening already in the chat, and we have Jeremy saying, "Wait." After a yawn. There's a live stream at 7 a.m. his time. Let's do this. Okay, appreciate that enthusiasm, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Let's get these up here. Ecam is saying, get out of your head. Yes, listen, there's a reason why I know these things. Totally, completely a reason. So let me be very, very honest. This came up for me as an idea that I wanted to bring to our community, the Ecam fam, because this past year I actually had a major blow up in my own relationship about quality time. Now, we are grown adults in a solid relationship, so we worked it out, we talked about it, but what it did teach me is that boundaries are something we need to continuously be working on. Specifically for me, my time, because I can get lost in this and spend so much time. So Randall, welcome. You are a licensed professional counselor. You are the educator of counselors, the professor of counselors in your program in the University at Texas where you teach. And you also are in private practice. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time. And why don't you go ahead and give us a little shout out to everybody listening today?
Well, glad to be here. I can honestly say 2 years ago, if you asked me if I'd be doing something like this for online creators, it would have been the farthest thing from my mind. And so I'm fairly new to the Ecamm family. I use it for my teaching. I do have a private practice, do counseling. My specialization is ministers or families, marriage, and I mentor other counselors. And so it's a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and just to hang out with the gang today.
Yeah, for sure. And you and I met because you came to the Ecam for Educators. You come to the Ecam for Educators meetups that David Paskin and I host. I'll share a little bit more about that and invite anybody who is interested. But that's where you and I met, is through that Ecam community group, as I like to call it. But I knew I wanted to share, talk about this, be open and honest, because I know we have a lot of people. And just like I believe it might be Katie saying, welcome, Randall. We're so glad you're part of the fam.
Thanks, Katie.
And I want to give a couple shout outs here. Say hello, Liz. Liz is joining us today. And the gospel source saying, I love this scene. Maybe that was the psychotherapy, the fake psychotherapy scene. Mark is joining us too. So we have a lovely, broad international audience. So, scene, right? And Paul is saying, I have never. So maybe he's saying he has never done any of those crossing the boundary issues that we're talking about. So welcome to everybody that's joining us. And then Matt Haas, awesome fun things, is saying, don't cross my boundary, people. Wait, I suppose I need a boundary. I'm here to learn. Welcome, Matt. I'm here to learn too. So we want to bring you a lovely, lovely conversation today. And shout out to Neil, who's here. Stream Profiles. Martin is here as well. Martin McKenna. Awesome. Awesome. And yes, you know what? Let's do this too. Liz, congratulations again from Matt and all of us. She was the Launchpad winner. No, she's working with Marshall to get her brand designed. And I personally subscribe to her newsletter, so I actually get her content when she sends it out. She's got some spunk, right? Her content is really fun to read. So I look forward to seeing what else she's going to be able to make real in her brand with Ecamm's help. We also have Video Like a Dad. Hi, Daryl. So happy to see you here today. And Mike Reed is joining us to learn. And Liz is saying, thank you, friends. So let's get on topic here, because we're going to start with the problem with boundaries. I actually want to share this in three different topics today. The problem, what causes that problem with boundaries, and we want to spend the most of our time with our solutions, because I want you guys to take away great value from our conversation with Randel today. So Randel, I know from my own learning, and feel free to tell me if you agree with this or if you have a different perspective, that when it comes to boundaries, there are some categories, types of boundaries. I think typically there are these 5 recognized physical, emotional, time, and functional boundaries. We're going to spend our time talking mostly about time boundaries, which is my big one. I have to admit, this is my biggest one. But then also functional and relational boundaries. I think physical boundaries are pretty easy to understand, but can you give us a little recap of each, and then we can move into talking about the ones that we've chosen to focus our time on?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the physical boundaries are easy to understand. Everybody, if you if you have your your circle of comfort, like how close you let people get to you, or if you want to get really basic about it, your skin is a physical boundary, right, to the rest of your body, protects your body. Emotional boundaries, how much we're going to let people live rent free in our head, how much we're going to be affected by the news on TV, putting those type of boundaries out. Time boundaries is pretty self-explanatory, and then obviously relational boundaries. And I think it's an important discussion to have today, because online creators in a lot of ways are entrepreneurs, in terms of having to manage our own schedules, having all these different things happening at once. And there's lots of stress that comes up with that. Most people, I haven't met an online creator yet that doesn't love what they do and do it because they think it has a purpose and enjoy doing it and they're passionate about it. Even, a lot of times it started as a hobby. We may love doing that, but if we're overworking and if we're not taking time to make sure that these boundaries in our life are healthy boundaries, then we're going to end up being less productive, less creative, and less fulfilled. And I don't think that's a goal. I don't think those are goals that any of us want. So I'm excited about our discussion today.
Me too. I mean, I just want to touch on slightly one thing you said about emotional boundaries, how much we will allow other people to live rent free in our heads. I had forgotten about that term. So,
Yeah.
and listen, guys, just because we're not going to be able to talk about all 5 of these doesn't mean that you shouldn't go ahead and explore them as well. I just want to go on the record right now saying that I practice counseling, meaning I see a counselor weekly. I love my counselor. He's fantastic. His name is Roger. We talk usually once a week because I like the maintenance of keeping myself healthy in many ways. So I'm a huge advocate for counseling. Obviously, you're a counselor too, Randel. So I love encouraging people to explore counseling as an option, and not just for major things. Sometimes just working through our boundaries is something that's really worth having sessions with a counselor for. And I do want to add that it's like any relationship. Sometimes you try with one person and it doesn't really work out. Don't give up. You can explore other people as well that could be a better fit. So anyway, I'm all for counseling, but honestly, time boundaries is such a big one for me, but I do have trouble distinguishing between time and functional boundaries, just from an understanding perspective in my own head, because I know functional boundaries is more about the ability for us to complete a task or a project. And I'm like, that kind of has a little bit to do with time. So in my own case, Randel, I underestimate how much time everything in life is going to take me. Even preparing the scenes and the overlays for today's for today's live stream, I was like, I think I can do that in 90 minutes. And this is, by the way, Fulgence and Anna designed a package for me, and then I customized it. So I know they do custom design work. And so I'd already had a nice, beautiful templates to work from, and it still took me 3 hours. So I'm chronically underestimating everything I do by 50%. What are your thoughts here?
Oh no, I think it's very, very common. Last week we had homecoming in our university, and we did a CEU for all the mental health clinicians in our area and our alumni, and I wanted to record it on Ecamm and using PTZ cameras. And so I was at a conference. I came home early. I said, I can get this set up in 4 hours. It took me six.
Mm,
Just things happen. We underplan. The functional part of it, it just depends on, you know, it can be confusing. It depends on what author you're reading and what perspective. From my perspective, they're all functional because all those boundaries serve a function. So when I think of functional boundaries, I just think of what type of boundary am I thinking about and what function does it serve? And how do I make sure it serves that function properly? But time boundaries are huge because we only have so much of it. We talk about it. Everybody's heard time's our most precious commodity, right? And a lot of times we get so much going on. There's not enough time in the day for all the ideas we have and all the relationships we have and all the commitments we have. And so then we end up having to, and we'll talk about this a little later, but we end up having to make value choices. And,
yeah, right.
those saying no, which is really hard to do for a people pleaser like me.
Mm. And I feel like a lot of people in the world will say, I'm also a people pleaser. But I would like to add that there's a difference between being a people person and a people pleaser. And I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe when we get to a place with healthy boundaries, those of us who love and enjoy those social interactions, those groups, maybe we can be a people person without feeling like we have to please everybody, because it's actually impossible. So it's unattainable to be able to please everybody, but it is hard. It is hard. So we're going to talk about what causes us to have unhealthy boundaries next. But before we do that, Randall, what do we get if we do this work? If we work on our boundaries and we establish healthy ones and continue to work on it because it's a process, what changes in our life? What good things come into our life when we do this work?
From a counselor perspective, that sounds like the miracle question, right? If I woke up tomorrow and everything was fixed, what would my life look like? Um, there's
Utopia.
so many different directions we could go with that. For our audience today, I think I would go with looking at improvements in self-care, improvements in your relationships, and then and focus on productivity, right? And so when we have healthy boundaries in place, we're going to see improvements in all three of those areas, which I think we would all agree are important, right? I want to have a healthy relationship with my spouse, but also want to do a really good job at what I do in my private practice, in my and in my university, right? And both of them take a lot of time. And so when I put healthy boundaries in place, I'm able to be who I need to be in all those arenas. Versus if I don't have those healthy boundaries in place, um, I'm usually not giving my best to any of those arenas, right? Or any of
Right.
those areas of life. And so the emotional well-being, reduced stress, more creativity, right? The more stressed we are, the poorer our boundaries are. Research shows that our creativity and our focus diminishes greatly, which is probably not a good idea when, if you're a content creator or an educator. And so, yeah, lots of benefits. And I know we're going to recommend later. There's several books out there. There's a book on boundaries, but that'll talk about all the emotional benefits, feeling better, less anxiety. Uh, de- for some folks, it's decreased depression, increased satisfaction, increased physical health issues, lower blood pressure. I mean, you can go, and then relationships, improved communication, improved intimacy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's all types of powerful ways that we that we grow from boundaries. And in my world, in my spirituality, there's a verse that says, "Guard your heart, for out of it flow the issues of life." It's actually my wife's life verse, and it really makes a lot of sense to me when I talk to students, and I talk to them about you've got to guard who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want, because everything flows out of who you are, and if you don't guard who you are, then it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to turn out pretty.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to acknowledge spirituality in general when it comes to any of these emotional based type of topics. So whatever your faith is,
Hmm.
whether you attend a church or a temple or a synagogue or something else, our spirituality comes into play big time with these things because it's so deeply ingrained in our beliefs, in our culture, in our family system. So I don't want to disregard faith and the importance of it that it plays in these emotional arenas too. So,
Can I add one more thing? And
mhm.
I may be wrong here, so don't quote me. I think it was Brene Brown in one of her talks said, "Do not negotiate who you are.
Yeah,
Never negotiate who you are." And one of the things about having poor boundaries is when we have poor boundaries, we're constantly negotiating who we are, and that's how we end up becoming who we don't want to be, right? And so, don't negotiate who you are, and
yeah, and
we're going to talk about this later. It's difficult to set healthy boundaries. It's painful. It'll cost you something, right? But the cost of not doing it is you really put your identity and everything into other things in your life, and you kind of lose control of that.
absolutely, at 100%. And we have a lot of people in the chat who are agreeing with this. Matt saying, I certainly don't please everyone, but I am a people person. So Matt sounds like he's probably got done the work of having healthy boundaries in place. Paul is saying learning to say no is big, and that is very true. Katie is saying
Yeah.
it's so hard to say no sometimes, and I agree with this. And Mark is saying yes equals longer, and Paul should have said say no and be okay with it. Yes, Paul, which is another step forward.
Mhm.
So we'll talk about the yes no thing a bit more when we talk about solutions, but I would like to add to the benefits part here. And that is the joy that we experience in doing things, being able to feel that continuous joy. Because for me, when I'm saying yes too much or not saying no enough, depending on how we look at it, or not prioritizing properly or underestimating time, which is the one I'm super guilty of, then there's less joy in the things that I'm doing. And that's usually the first warning sign for me that I need to do a little more self care. I need to have a little more fun, is when I'm like, why does this feel like a burden all of a sudden when I love this? I've gotten great about it with my teaching, but like I said, Ben and I had a major blow up, and it led to very good conversation and us having to come up with an agreement about me establishing some work hours. So, by the way, I have a professional crush on people like Brene Brown. So, pretty much all of her work is fantastic. I think I could talk about her. I could probably do a month-long seminar just on Brene Brown's work. But in
Yeah,
any
some
case,
good stuff for sure.
so the joy part, maintaining joy is really important to me. The other part is that's important to me as an educator. I teach at a university as well. So for me, it's being able to teach this and show this to younger people. So for my students, this is a part of my legacy, is helping them have better communication skills, because when I look back on my own life, I have a wonderful family. My parents loved us so much, but we had major issues around boundaries, particularly because we grew up struggling with my father's alcoholism. And I say we struggled because even though it was my father's addiction, this impacted all of us. So growing up, not only did I not know enough about boundaries, like we had no boundaries. But I also want to say that now, looking at it with adult eyes, having done counseling I started counseling in college to understand all this. And today my father's been sober for a long time and we have a great relationship. But looking back, you think nobody taught me this stuff. In fact, I learned the opposite of healthy practices. So you have to take it on for yourself. And I wanted to share that with everybody because, maybe you can connect to that. Maybe you relate to that, but I also know that there's a better way. And I want to pass that on to my college students in leadership courses, even in my public speaking course. I build in healthy communication skills, but also for my nieces and nephews, like being able to say, hey, this is actually very powerful tools that you can use to show people in our lives there are better ways to deal with this stuff than perhaps the ways that we were taught. And it's what our family had to do to survive. So I don't have that resentment about it anymore, but I know it's like, hey, there is a better way. And that's a big reason too why I wanted us to be able to to talk about it. So I think we've established the problem here. And sometimes that problem
I
looks
think
like,
I was going to say, in addition to your joy, it's also the peace aspect because you can't really embrace it and enjoy the joy in your life if there's not peace. And what boundaries does is help bring us peace. The challenge, which I know we're going to talk about, but the challenge to it, because of the example you gave, is many times boundaries are counterintuitive and they're confusing. For instance, with families with addiction, there's a behavior called enabling, where they enable the alcoholic, and enabling feels loving to them, right? It feels like you're doing something loving when actually it's causing more damage to the family. And so setting a healthy boundary and not enabling the person who's in active addiction is painful. It hurts. It feels like you're being cruel, but it's actually the healthiest thing you can do. So
right. And and like people were saying in the chat, it takes a lot to get there. But,
it,
when it comes to us creating content, running solo businesses, major issues come up for, I'm telling you, like the inbox monster. Like I said before, I don't, that drives me insane trying to keep up with emails. Then I have my partner Ben, who has 27,937 unread messages in his email. And when I'm complaining about trying to get rid of these 70, or deal with these 70, he's like, just delete them all. And I'm like, what? I could never do that. So we all handle these obligations in different ways. But no, inbox is a big deal. Content creep is a big deal too for a lot of us, which is, as we were talking about in the very beginning, our work time is bleeding into our personal time, our family time, our take care of myself time, the time that we should be dedicating for self-care. Or perhaps like you filmed a ton of stuff and you took no breaks and you walk at, you're like, when have I even seen sunlight today? I've been in my studio for 10 hours. Those kind of things that can happen. We're not taking good care of our bodies as well. But so what causes us to have these boundaries issues in your opinion, Randall? Where do they come from for most of us? I mean, I shared that sometimes, like in my case, growing up, where we were dealing with alcoholism, it can come from events like traumatic experiences or survival tactics. But what other kinds of things? Where do they come from?
I think we start there. You just hit it. It's what was not only what was not modeled for us, but what was also modeled for us because we learn from what's modeled from us. So some of us learned and had unhealthy boundary patterns, in become part of our schema, and then didn't have the opportunity to have healthy boundary patterns modeled for us. And so that's part of it. And I think it's important in that one that we learn that we give ourselves grace and just acknowledge that a lot of that was out of our control, and it's okay to have we have to go learn those skills.
Right.
One of the shortcomings of the program that I work in, or that most counseling programs have, is we teach counselors how to be really good counselors, but we do not teach them how to be good entrepreneurs. And many counselors go into private practice, and that is a whole different world. I mean,
Totally.
we it was for content creators. It could almost be entrepreneur creators, right? Because most content creators
Oh, I
or
like that
entrepreneurs
term. That sounds nice there,
don't have
Randall.
they don't have those skills, right? Because they've never run a business or they never. So that starts there. You mentioned another one, blurring work and personal time. And it isn't just our schedule, our time that bleeds over into our relationships and our personal life. It's our stress that spills over into our relationships and our personal life. And so having struggled with that, the always on, and I'm just taking a wild stab here because we're with content creators, that always on mentality, that striving for perfection. The video's not good enough. The content's not quite right. The lighting's not perfect, right? I've got to make it a little better. And so we can never turn our brain off because we're always criticizing our work and saying, I've got to make this better. It's not quite there. I had that issue last Friday. I could have been done in 4.5 hours, but it wasn't good enough for me, right? And
Mm,
it would have been fine. And so another one I think might be fear of missing out. We've all heard of FOMO. I'm going to miss an opportunity. If I say no to
yes.
this opportunity where I could get some good, for lack of a better term, publicity for my channel or for the work I do, not because you want to be famous, but because you truly want to help people. And
Absolutely.
the way to help people is to get in front of people. So the fear of missing out can be a big one. Guilt. Oh, just guilt about taking time off, guilt about not doing enough work. Yeah, I get that one a lot because I love my students. I love what I do. And yeah, my wife the other day, about, well, a couple weeks ago, I'd said, I'm not going to work tonight. And she smiled at me
Like,
and said, okay,
oh, wait, I know this smile. Like, yeah, okay. That smile.
yeah, yeah, because it was a nice that I normally do work. And so I said, I'm not going to really work tonight. I'm going to chill. And I don't know what happened. And that's the downside of having a home office, right? And I remember she knocked on my office door and came in and she goes, Hey, baby, you said you weren't going to work 3 hours ago.
Oh, dang.
So you're 3 hours over time. I'm like, but I got up, hugged her, and I said, you're right. Thank you. Because it's so easy. It's just so easy to fall into that. So fear of missing out, blurring time, always on mentality, guilt, lack of modeling. There's lots of different reasons. Pleasing behavior,
Mm.
difficulty saying no, lots of pitfalls. And I'd be curious, and I can't see the chat, I don't think on my end. I'd be curious if anybody in the group knows what some of their pitfalls are, some of the reasons they, struggle with maintaining healthy boundaries.
Yeah,
Because
please.
we all blow it.
Totally. And please do, if you're willing to share, or, if you're willing to share on behalf of a friend who you know that struggles with boundaries, put those in the chat. We'd just like to get a sense of, are we hitting the mark here? Are these resonating with you? Are there other areas that you're struggling with in terms of boundaries? But if you'd like to share, please do, and I'll share them on screen. But in the meantime, I'll share some of the additional comments that have come in. So Paul is saying, stop walking through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong.
Oh, that one's one too. Absolutely. Low self-esteem, desire to fit. One
Yeah.
we talked about was that I wanted to mention was cultural expectations, right? So many
Mm,
cultural that can be overwhelming depending on what your cultural background is and what
sure.
familial lifestyle looks like and things like that.
Absolutely. I know that's big one. I mean, myself, the oldest of four growing up with my mom and dad, and I felt extremely responsible for my three younger brothers, even though there's only 3 years between all four of us. So I'm only 1 year older than my brother Randel, by the way, whose name my brother one of my brother's name is Randel. Then I have brothers that
Good
are
name.
twins that are only 2 years younger than Randel. So we're all the same age, but I felt at least 10 years older than them growing up because I felt very responsible. And then Trudy is saying there will always be a cost. Just decide if you're willing to pay for it.
Oh,
That's
you're going
deep,
to pay
Trudy.
for it. One way or another. It's just which cost do you want to pay? Absolutely. Great comment, Judy.
Thank you. Then we have Anna joining us. She's saying, hello, fam. Hello to us. And then Jeremy's was triggered by that red badge on email, the notifications. I know that one too. That one makes me nuts. All right. And then let's see. A little Matt's sharing some comments here with Anna. And then Paul is also saying we have to accept that done is better than perfect. Perfect will never happen. And listen, if you guys want more of these types of live streams, I am more than happy to keep talking about this stuff because I feel like, especially something like this, I have 10, 20 different things that we can different. I'm actually biting my tongue not to say more about this. But the one thing I will say is that I read a book a long time ago by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way that's meant to help creative people get unstuck. And that in that book is where I first understood what perfectionism really is. So I don't want to derail our conversation, but maybe this is something we can come back to a different time. But for Matt, he's saying
And
pitfalls. Oh, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, because there's two more that I think especially for our audience today, that fear of rejection is huge. And then what you mentioned earlier about, we talked about the lack of modeling, but the other side of that is, or the other portion of that is unresolved trauma,
Mm.
childhood trauma of all types. It can have a direct impact on your ability to set healthy boundaries. So
100%. And there's another quote that's coming to my mind that has helped me so much in my own journey, which is people can only meet you as far as they've been willing to meet themselves. So sometimes we've gone on the healing journey, we've done the counseling, we've done the work. Other people haven't. So they, you know, we can't have the same expectations of them as someone who has done the work. We have to try to meet people where they are. So I just want to say, wherever you are on this boundaries journey, wherever you are in the healing process, maybe you have done a lot of this work, maybe you need to do a little bit more. But we hope that this conversation brings you some insight or some resources or some great next steps that you might be able to take, because ultimately the healthier we are, the more creative we are. This is
Mhm.
true. So it does directly contribute to our creation on so many so many levels. But let me come back
Another
to
way another way to look at that is that we have to remember is our healthy boundaries, right? We're responsible for us, right? We've hopefully learned that we're responsible for us. Our healthy boundaries protect us and our
Mhm.
relationships, but our healthy boundaries do not have the power to make other people healthy, which means sometimes our healthy boundaries are not going to give us the results that we wish they'd give. They are going to
Right.
protect us, but the results in other relationships are not going to be what we hope for.
Oh, 100%. And I'll add Matt's comment on here. Pitfalls, saying yes too easily. I've gotten better at this, but more work is needed. I personally can relate to this a lot because my personality, the way that I'm built, I love new experiences. And I on the factor 5 model, if anybody's ever done those personality tests, and the first level is your level of openness,
Mhm.
conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. My level of openness to new experience is something like 98%. It's so high. So I have a hard time saying this, but here's the rule I put in place for myself. No matter how excited I am, no matter how good it is, no matter how aligned, I need to give myself 24 hours before I decide. Because usually after 24 hours, I'll realize, does this realistically fit in my schedule? But it is so hard, not because I'm not good at tuning out the things that don't align with, say, like my work style or the brand, but I just love and enjoy new experiences. So Matt, yeah, I totally get this part too. Then Stephen is saying, very relatable on many levels. I'm so glad. Mark is saying, don't bite yourself. Don't bite yourself in the butt. Let's see. And then Jeremy saying, people have a tendency to equate likes and subscribes as validation that they are worth it. And YouTube exasperates this mentality by dangling the monetization carrot as a sign of validation. Now, Jeremy said a very key word here, validation. I know
Mhm.
I have struggled with what is my source of validation and getting very clear on what that should be. But what do you have to say about this? What do you think, Randall?
Oh, I think you're nailing it. I mean, I work with students all the time who are kind of going through this process of transitioning out of being their parent's child to being their own adult. And many of them have, grown up getting their validation from being the right student or being the best athlete. And we have to walk through that and, look at you're more than that. You're more than what you do. You're more than what you look like. You're more than what grades you can produce. And so, and it is a process. It is a process. But yeah, um, you got to be hitting the right target. And so if your validation is likes and subscribes, that's great when it goes great. But then when it goes bad, right, or it doesn't happen,
Yeah.
you've got to have your own identity to stand on.
Yeah.
And especially in my world, I if I tell my students all the time, I'm like, if every client likes you, if all your online reviews are good, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not a good counselor because that means you're not confronting clients, you're not holding clients accountable. And so if you have this need to be liked by your counselors, we need to work on that first because it's going to affect how you counsel, and it's actually going to not only harm you, it's going to harm your clients because you're going to avoid things you do not need to avoid that your client needs you to work on, because you're scared of them being mad at you or upset or not liking you or giving you a bad review. And at the end of the day, that's a pretty unethical thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for that comment, and Randall for your insights. I think that's very key, and also how we handle and respond to negativity. I mean, all of us at some point have had to deal with negative comments. I've been fortunate because I have very small numbers online right now that I don't have a lot of I can't think of a situation where I've had to deal with negative comments, but I have over the years occasionally have to dealt with negative evaluations for my students at the end of the semester with
Oh yeah.
with the end of semester evaluations, which are anonymous. And listen, there could be 49 fantastic reviews, and there will be one negative comment because of our negativity bias. And I'm like, dang. And I know that that stings me for 24 straight hours. But I've learned, you know what? I'm human. I have to give myself space and that I'm not going to please everybody. I have to remind myself of that pretty regularly, once a semester. I won't, but can I lay down my head at night knowing I gave this class my absolute best? I showed up for them. I taught them everything I knew that I felt would be valuable to their life. I answered their questions. I honored my obligations as their professor, and I do like to go above and beyond in certain things. And as long as I can say, hey, I did that, whatever happens, happens with the evaluations. That cannot
Right.
be my source of validation.
You're measuring you're measuring what you do and you meeting your purpose and not measuring the outcomes of what you do.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Because if you measure the outcomes, then again, you're putting it in the hands of other people. And there's too many factors involved in that.
Yeah. And Katie's saying you need your own identity, past likes and subscribes. Absolutely. Because if that all goes away, you still have to be you. You still have to have a healthy and beautiful life and be there
Mhm.
for your loved ones outside of this online space. Like, we're so fortunate in the eCamp community to be surrounded by positive people, to be surrounded by loving, caring people who we support each other in so many ways. But if all of this were to go away, we still have to be okay.
Mhm.
So I love that. I love that. Thank you, Katie. And
And the
Mark was
license.
commenting and adding in that he meant don't bite your tongue, which makes sense. And I know Mark is in a different country, so I love hearing the different expressions that come from different countries too. It's like, yeah, don't bite your own tongue, at least not intentionally, because man, it hurts when you do that.
Well, and here's the beauty of it that we don't, or the challenge in it is if we are seeking all the likes and subscribes or the affirmation in other people and all those things that, and we're not setting healthy boundaries, we end up losing the likes and subscribes. And I know it's not what it is, but we end up losing that, those likes and subscribes with the people closest to us. We end up losing those relationships. We end up losing the value of those relationships. And at the end of the day, as much as I love my students, um, when I used to pastor and I'd speak to hundreds of people, there was only one opinion I wanted after that service, and that was my wife's, right?
Mm.
Which she was always honest, so it wasn't always pretty. But you know what I mean? At the end of the day, the person I was going home with was the person whose opinion mattered to me, but I had to teach myself to do that. I had to learn. We went back to, emotional boundaries. It's not just other people living rent free in my head. I've got to be able to set boundaries so my own emotions don't live rent free, right? My own emotions don't take over, or my own thought process doesn't live rent free in my head without being challenged. So,
Absolutely. I think that was one of the biggest things in my own world is what I was allowing to happen in my head, not so much what other people were saying, right? It was a lot of it was coming from me and figuring that out. So a lot of self-care work, a lot of self-worth work. And I will say that I always felt that I was a good person. I always felt that I was a bright person and that I had a lot to contribute. But there's in one area of my life where I was continuously making bad choices. And that was an
mhm.
area of self worth that I needed to build up. So sometimes it can show up in one area of your life and not in another. But it's so important to take good care of ourselves. And Paul is saying I have to remind myself what you think of me is none of my business.
Oh, come on.
Come on. And also, I've heard lots of coaches and experts talk about this too, is consider the source. Is my rephrase of it is consider the source. The person who's saying this, do they have they ever done something like what you're trying to do? Like, it's hindsight is 2020, and it's so easy to criticize others, but the person where this is coming from, like, does their opinion, is it really important to you? Like, do they have the knowledge, experience, expertise to be able to give you a negative comment? So considering the source is a really important tip too. So let's play a little game here. Truth
And
or
consider the
trash?
evidence.
Truth or trash here, folks. So let me know what you think in the chat. And I know we have a delay on YouTube. So the first question is, do you think if I set boundaries on being selfish, is this true or is it trash? If I set boundaries, I am being selfish. And while we wait for some answers to come in, you can just type truth or trash. Paul. Paul has said like so many great comments and insights in here. So Paul, I'm thinking, just want to shout at you, say appreciate you for all this. But what is the deal with selfishness and self-care? Why do so many of us confuse it, Randall? Like, where do you think that misalignment happens between selfishness and self-care?
Um, a lot of it could be upbringing and what we were taught. And even in Western civilization, we're very individualistic, right? But when we do self care, often it feels selfish. It feels selfish, but again, that doesn't mean it is selfish, right? And so if a mom says, "I need to take half a day to myself and go do something for me," and the kids say, "Mom, I can't believe you're doing that," how you, right? The mom's because she's a great mom and she loves her kids, and it's going to feel selfish. And so and it also, we've kind of learned that if we do stuff for ourselves and we make it about us, that in itself is selfish, but it's not true. It goes back to the old adage of if the oxygen mask drop in an airplane,
Mm,
right? Put the mask on yourself before you do your child. That is counterintuitive. If you're a mom or a dad, it is counterintuitive to save yourself before you save your child. But the truth of that is by saving yourself, you have the ability and strength and wherewithal to save your child, right? And that is what self-care does. Self-care gives you the ability to show up for the people in your life when they need you. But again, it's counterintuitive. It'll feel selfish. I mean, I'm going to do some self care today because it's been a rough 2 weeks,
mm,
right? And I'm taking the afternoon off and I'm hitting the golf course. And this morning I thought, should I really go do that? Like,
mm-hmm.
yes,
Yes, you
right?
should.
Yes,
Send me a
absolutely.
picture.
There you go.
But no, the
It's beautiful.
the the mask on the airplane thing hits home really hard for me because I'll tell you, I've been traveling internationally ever since I was 2 years old. I have heard those announcements so many times, and I remember thinking every single time, there is no way that if I have a person next to me more vulnerable than me, that I'm going to put my own mask on first until I took on the lessons of self-care and I realized I can be of no use to anybody unless I am well. I'm putting on the mask so that I can help other people because I'm good. I've got my oxygen. So let's come back to the truth or trash here. We have got overwhelming responses in the chat, unanimous that this is trash. Steven is saying trash. Ryder Coach Corner is saying trash. Martin is saying trash. Eden is saying trash. Absolutely. Although I just realized that this is a giant comment, so let me fix that. Take your eyes off the screen for 1 second. So Eden is saying trash, and so is everybody else. So what is the answer here, Randall? If I set boundaries, I'm being selfish.
It's trash. If I set boundaries, I'm being loving. The challenge is you have to tune out all the voices that are going to tell you you're being selfish because the boundaries affect them in a way they don't like. And so reframe it. If I set boundaries, I'm being loving.
Okay, so
Or selfish, what you want to get.
that one, trash. That one is
Trash.
total trash. Next up, let's see, our next question is not question, but next statement, truth or trash. Boundaries are a sign of disobedience. This can especially ring true remembering how we grew up and whether we obeyed our parents or disobeyed our parents or authorities or how might we respond to authority. So let me know what you think. Boundaries are a sign of disobedience. And then Paul is saying, you can't help anyone if you are dead unless you're an organ donor. Thank you, Paul.
And the good comments continue.
I'm gonna put exactly. This is great, man. These comments today are fantastic. I love this. Awesome. And then we have Roy joining us, tech troublemaker. Now you tell us at Paul Duncan. It's funny. And then welcome to the O Show. Good day to you too. Thank you for being here. All right, so let's see. What do you think boundaries are a sign of disobedience, Randall? What's the answer to this one? Truth or trash?
What's our group think?
Haven't gotten any comments just yet on this one, though Mark is got a question mark. So he's thinking about it. He's thinking about it.
Yeah, in general, it's trash, right? There are some exceptions, but it's all in. For instance, if a child is trying to set boundaries, right, and being disobedient to their parent, technically they're being disobedient. But what's beautiful about it is they're trying to set boundaries. It's just you got to teach them to set the right boundaries and what those boundaries look like. But as an adult, setting healthy, and I think the key is to put healthy in front of that.
Mm-hmm.
Healthy boundaries are not a sign of disobedience, right?
Yeah. And
If
Steven's comment here saying truth for the other person, trash for me. I mean,
That too.
I don't mean to laugh, but I didn't know if he was joking with
Oh,
that or
a
serious, but
lot of this goes back to the message we get because our boundaries do affect other people, and especially if we're new at setting boundaries and people aren't used to us setting boundaries that are
mhm.
healthy, it does affect them in a negative way initially, and they will almost always push back and try to guilt you or gaslight you
Yeah.
or whatever. So yeah, but in general, it's trash.
And John does bring up a very good point that I feel myself, trash. But it's hard due to cultural upbringing. I mean, I agree with him. In my house
Yeah.
growing up, like I said, there's four of us. Disobeying was not okay, not allowed, and we grew up very very strict with that. And even for me, like as a very curious person, it was really hard to ask questions or to question anything because it felt like disrespect. So, I have a different approach whenever kids ask questions in my life now, but I agree with John. Culturally, this can be a very sensitive issue. I know you brought up that point earlier too, Randall.
And I think it's important that we respect that, right? Because the thing about boundaries and setting healthy boundaries, and this is also a challenge, but the beautiful thing about it is it's our choice and our responsibility. And I've had students who have come into that and I don't tell them, oh, you're wrong because my values. I just tell them you're gonna have to you make a value choice. The cost of setting that boundary is not something you're willing to pay, and that's okay. You don't have to have the same boundaries I have in certain areas. Now there are some boundaries that could be pretty unhealthy and pretty dangerous, but when you talk about cultural boundaries and interactions with parents and children, I think it's important that we respect each other's culture in that area.
Hmm. Yeah, and for Eden, she saying that she feels that as well. Talking about the cultural expectations that we have in terms of disobedience. And Jeremy's saying, "Yep, strict upbringing for him too." The quote that you might get from a parent saying, "I'll give you something to cry about," right? And even that, how we express our emotions and what's considered appropriate for ways to do that. And Mark brings up a valid point too. Like he needs a little more context in general for things because statements can be interpreted in many ways, and that is true, Mark.
Exactly.
And so good. Steven is saying that he did mean for that comment to be cute. So that's good. So laughing was appropriate. It sounded cute to me. So their crisis is not necessarily mine. Good, good, good. The O show is saying that for me, if you don't set boundaries, there's a chance of other people pushing too far. Yes, especially right. Like people will honestly try to get as much as they can from us unless we put in some healthy boundaries.
Oh, it's guaranteed. If you don't set boundaries, people will eventually cross them.
For sure.
It's a,
And
you're
look,
absolutely right on.
I love hearing this. I mean, John is saying, just responding back to Eden's agreement, but that he started practicing healthier boundaries and it's made him feel so much healthier mentally. So it's so good, so good. And it's a deprogramming that we have to do and constantly work on. Like, yes, it is a constant process. It is like brushing our teeth or cutting our hair. Like it's never going to end until we're no longer alive. It's something that we always need to be doing consistently. So let's do
Mhm.
one more. I did prepare more, but I'm also conscious of the time and I want to make sure we spend a lot of time on the solutions part here. So we'll do one more trivia, which is if I set boundaries, I may be hurt. Let me know what you think. If I set boundaries, I may be hurt. So give everybody a few seconds to do that. I know it's going to take some time for people's responses to come in,
Well,
but
as they're doing that, just to follow up on what you said to give them a little time, um, you do need to be prepared for when you do set new boundaries that people are going to push back. And part of setting healthy boundaries is there has to be a consequential thing that happens if the boundaries are not respected, right? And if you set a new boundary and somebody crosses it and that consequence doesn't happen, your boundary becomes meaningless, right? And so just being aware that, hey, I get excited, I'm going to set new boundaries, this is going to benefit me, but also understanding that people around you are going to cross them and you're going to have to hold to those boundaries. And that season can be painful and it can make you question your boundaries, but you've got to be prepared because again, if you're a parent and you set a boundary with your child and there's a consequence if the child crosses it, and then the child crosses it and you say, well, I told you not to cross that boundary, but you don't enforce the consequence, it's the child learns they're going to get away with it. So, and important. And again, a lot of these boundaries aren't about people taking advantage of us intentionally. Um, but sometimes that is the case, whether it's at work or in our personal life or whatever. So just be prepared for that. If
Yeah,
I set boundaries, I may be hurt. Trash or truth?
and we have lots of responses, and let me just get to those. So Paul is saying that it's trash. Katie's saying this is a tough one. I feel like the answer is trash, but I do feel like it's partially true. Stephen is agreeing that it's trash. And I also, in my opinion, and I don't know what you're going to tell us exactly, but then Paul is saying you have to enforce your boundaries and be okay with it. Now, I'm going to say, I want to share an example. I had to set a boundary with someone in my life a couple of years ago, and it was really hard, and I was hurt. It didn't mean that I didn't need to do it, and it didn't mean that I wasn't going to keep it and that it wasn't a good idea. It was good, it was healthy, it was the right move, but in that moment, there are hurt feelings that come with it. So, in my opinion, this can be true depending on the circumstances and the situations, but like you said, we have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
So what do you
This
think? Is
goes
this
back
one?
to your earlier statement about having context, but it's true. And you gave a great example, right? I mean, how many parents have set a boundary with their child and their child turned around and said, "I hate you," or "You're the worst dad in the world." And even though logically we know they're just reacting, it still hurts, right?
Mm,
Or clients I've worked with that were in abusive relationships and had to make a decision to end the relationship. There was a lot of pain involved in that, right? Because everything about that relationship wasn't abusive. The whole history wasn't abusive. There was pain in that. There was grief in that. So it's true. You may be
okay.
hurt,
All right. So
but
the first
you're
one we
going to be
talked
hurt.
about. Sorry to cut you off there, Randall.
You're going to be hurt either way. If you do not set healthy boundaries, you're going to get hurt as well. So again, it goes back to which pain are you willing to, do I want the pain of the toothache that never goes away, or do I want the pain of going to the dentist for a few hours?
Okay, that is a powerful analogy. Thank you very much. So that first one, if I set boundaries on being selfish, is trash. Boundaries being a sign of disobedience, kind of trash, but depends on our culture, depends on our upbringing. So that one's not so straightforward. And the third, if I set boundaries, I may be hurt. This one is definitely true, but again, it's something that we need to be prepared for. So we are going to head over to our solutions now that we've talked about this. I did have more truth or trash, but you know what? We're running low on time here. So now that we understand how we developed unhealthy boundaries and what the consequences and benefits are, let's talk about what can we all do to have stronger boundaries. We've talked a lot about it in general. People have contributed some thoughts already, but from a solution standpoint, from your expertise as a professional counselor, Randall, as content creators who want to have a creative and fulfilling life without compromising our well being, protecting our time, what do we need to do?
Well, a lot of times we when we go to set healthy boundaries, we go straight to setting the boundary, but our boundaries need to be set out of our understanding of our own core values and our own core priorities, because that's what's going to drive them, and that's what's going to help you have the strength to stick to them when you get to a point that it is so painful. So, what are your core priorities? What are your values when it comes to your work, when it comes to your family, when it comes to your personal life and your own self care? Almost, what are your non-negotiables, right? There are non-negotiables in we talked about some that y'all set up. We have ours in our marriage. There are non-negotiables that we've set up, and so we've got to know what those are, and then we got to be realistic as we go into this process. Work-life balance is a myth. Anybody who's lived long enough, it's a myth, and
Yeah.
so
I mean, it's never going to be an even thing,
it's never going to be perfect,
right?
right? It's never going to balance like it would on a scale. So we have to respect the demands of the season you're in. Um, a lot of us are in different seasons, whether it's our family situation, our work situation, whether we're starting a business, or so we have to respect the demands of the season. We need to respect the rhythm, our own rhythm. My wife will get up and get more done before 7 a.m. than I get done all day. I need to, I will get more done working at night. And so respect your rhythm, respect your personality. But that also means you need to respect the rhythm and personality of the people closest to you that you're setting the boundaries with, because they have their own boundaries that need to be considered.
So
And
let me
so,
just backtrack one quick second. Okay, so I'm clear. We've got to establish our values. core values, our non-negotiable things. And,
Mhm.
Katie loves that comment. And Writer Coach Corner saying, give us the goods, give us the solutions. Eden, I'm so glad you loved the truth or trash game. And Katie agrees with you that work-life balance, totally 100%. That's a myth. So we're with you on the values. Now, the second part you talked about was respect the demands of the seasons that we're in. How can we
Yeah.
summarize that? Respect seasons. I guess I could put
Well,
respect
okay. For
seasons.
instance, as a professor, the first 2 weeks of the semester, actually the week before the semester, the first 2 weeks of the semester in my world are crazy. And my wife knows that. And so she'll ask, hey, when did your semester start back or whatever? Because I have so much content I have to create for my online classes. Part of that's because I'm a perfectionist and I never want to use the same stuff more than 2 or 3 semesters. There's so much going on with getting my students placed in practicums and getting their paperwork done. There's no way I can do that in a 40-hour week. But we
Yes.
also know that once I get through that, so we respect that season. We make adjustments, things that we normally do. We don't do our date night during those 3 weeks. We do a
Mm.
big date. It's over. So
Okay.
and involve discussion. You can't do it all in your own head.
This is very powerful. And this is something I'm realizing in my own life too, that I need to get better at is when I'm grading my students' speeches and presentations, that takes up so much time. But that's not all the time. What
Right.
I need to do in terms of respecting that season is okay, so every semester, I need to put on the calendar when those big assignments are due, and I have to not schedule other things around that because that's how I get crazy overwhelmed. So I think that's really powerful, which involves looking at our calendar and planning ahead, which sometimes I'm not the greatest at planning ahead. Just want to admit that. I am a bit of a procrastinator. So anyway,
I would guess that Katie's season was crazy in the weeks leading up to Creator Camp and then the week of
yes,
Creator Camp.
I would guess that
Much
as
more than
well.
the other. We all have those seasons. And so, but then there's also seasons that last longer. So I don't have 3 children under 5 at home, right? I don't have ball games I'm having to go to and practices. And though I enjoyed that stuff, right? I don't have all those extra scheduled things. My wife and I are empty nesters and we're in our careers. And so I have more time. There's things I do now. There's no way I could do it when I had children at home. And it's okay to say this season, I may have to put this to the side. I may have to say no to the thing I want to do because it's the wrong season to do it.
Absolutely. I agree. This one is super important. So getting clear on our values, respecting our seasons. What's next?
Let's get practical. Things like setting work schedules, right? And as a creator, and so especially when most of us or a lot of us probably do a lot of our work at home. So setting office hours and this is the time I'm going to work and this is the time I'm going to make for family. And again, the important thing is here is to discuss this. I don't make decisions about my schedule without my wife's input. I just
Hmm.
because she's important to me and I need to know what her schedule is, right? And so setting work as a creator so that you can and then when you do that, alongside of that, tech-free zones, digital detox, schedule those things, right? You may not have, I don't have the ability, my house isn't big enough for me to separate my hangout cave from my work cave, right? And so in their same room, but when I know I don't want to work, I shut my computer down so that there's more steps I have to do to get things going. So setting work, the learning to say no, we've talked about that already. Saying, and it's not just saying no for us people pleasers that say yes to everything because we want to be liked and we want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
They're good, but it's saying no to the things that we want to do. That's hard,
Yeah, no.
right?
Yes,
Saying no to the
that is
things we
very
like to do.
hard. And listen, that I have had to do that. I have had to do that over and over again ever since Ben and I came up with our agreement. And also just it takes discovering so much about who we each are individually and what matters. Quality time to me is quality time as long as we're together, even if it's with other people. For him, quality time means he and I alone. So I have to think about that just because we're together with others doesn't quite fill his love bucket. So
Mhm.
that's an important thing. And I did in our agreements, I did say that, I'm going to stop working around 5 o'clock every day so that we have our evenings together. And that is a special time for us. And we go to bed early and all of that stuff. But there are two exceptions to that we talked about. And one is I like to be at ENN on Monday nights, even though nights are kind of off limits, but this is an exception. And then I have a meeting. And also, I'm not my greatest at night. So it's hard for me to do things at night. I prefer to do things during the day, which is why this one is scheduled for 10 a.m. Eastern today. But the other is that I have a group of students that I meet with, and they're only all available Wednesday nights. So, and I keep it to an hour. I do my best not to go beyond that. I don't love having to do that, but that's just what's available to me this season. But I love also that you're saying getting input from loved ones. And I want to show this comment to you that Stephen said. Recently, he explained to his wife that because he had an upcoming event, he would not be available as usual. Getting ahead of the issue avoided a potential conflict. Then he says, not always this smart.
Well, that is two great examples of the very next one, and that is you have to communicate. You have to communicate that, but you also have to communicate your boundaries with others. It is unfair to expect people in your life to respect boundaries that they do not know exist. So you have to communicate to them. And it's not just our loved ones and our significant others and the people that support our dreams, it's also the clients we serve. So part of the communicating boundaries is telling a client, I really want to do this for you, but I cannot do it in that timeline or I can't do it to that. I mean, being honest about that versus saying, well, I need that income or I need that work. So I'm just going to say yes to it and then put everything else at risk. And so communicating boundaries with others. And then two or three more would be prioritize self-care and mental health, which you mentioned
But
earlier.
before you move on from that one, Randall, I do think it's important. And sometimes it's not even verbally. Sometimes the boundary is communicating the boundary means in an email automated reply, please, thank you for your message. Please, office hours are from this time to this time. I let my students know they can contact me anytime they want. I'm not going to reply, and my notifications are not on certain hours. But but I do let them know what the rules are. I do communicate with them. Hey, this is what I'm okay with. This is what I'm not okay with. So sometimes that doesn't even just have to be like we have to have this deep conversation. It's just we're going to be working together. So here are my office hours. I'm not available these days. So I agree with you. But now please continue.
Oh, no problem. Hey, I used to give my cell phone number to all my students. No, 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 no. I love them, but now I only give it to the students who are working with clients because there's a reason for that. Prioritizing self-care and mental health. We've talked about that, the importance of that. Um, and then the last two things would be we need accountability, right? I know that sounds like a bad word sometimes, but we have to implement systems of accountability. And well, that's a whole different thing. And that could be accountability, for instance, like my wife coming in saying, hey, baby, it's been 3 hours. She's holding me accountable, right?
Yeah.
She gave me grace, but at 3 hours, she's like, okay, I'm going to hold him accountable. So sometimes it's hard to do it on our own. So, people working out together have a lot more success, groups. I mean, I think that's a beautiful thing about being like an eCamp for educators. There's a level of
Yeah.
accountability. If you say, I'm going to share next time, you better be ready to share next time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty much the only way I get anything done in life is by
There you
saying it to other people and forming small groups or partnerships to be able to get those things done.
But accountability comes with this beautiful gift called encouragement, right? Because if you have the right accountability systems in your life, when you're doing it right, they're going to affirm that and they're going to encourage that. And when you do it, when you fall short, they're going to acknowledge that and hold you accountable. But then they're going to encourage you when you're making the adjustments you need to make. And then the last one, I think, I mean, there's so many written resources, but give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. It's going
Yeah.
to take time to reestablish these to establish these healthy boundaries. It's going to take time. It's going to give grace to the people around you. It's going to take time for them to adjust to it. Um, Dr. Cloud and boundaries, he says the ability to set boundaries is not something you're born with. It's a skill that can be learned. But most of us know that learning skills that are learning that level of skill takes time. Our students, it takes time for them. It takes time for my students to learn how to be a counselor. That's why it's a 3-year program and not a 3-month program.
Sure.
So give yourself grace.
I need to come back to the self-care one right over
Well,
here.
come on back.
Let's come back to guys. What are some of your favorite ways to do self-care? What are the things that make you happy? I think some of the big things are like you mentioned playing golf for you, so probably like some type of a sport recreational activity. I mean, there's like going to get a manicure or a pedicure or a massage or your hair done or a haircut or a clean shave. Like there's some of these like physical things, but I would love to hear from everybody what are the self-care practices that you love that make you feel good? Or what else besides golf for you, Randall?
Well, as they add those responses, and we think that's the first place we go with self-care, and that's because they're our favorite, right? I love being on a golf course. My wife's are massages and hanging out with friends. But self-care is anything that helps you care for your mental health. So sometimes my care for my mental health is I go get a bunch of flies swatted out of the way. I get my oil changed and my lawn mowed and all these things I haven't had time to do. I get my office back organized again. It's actual work, right? It's not exactly a fun activity, but it is still self care,
That's a big one
right?
for me too. Like things have to be organized and clean for me to have peace. That's just something that I have to do to be well.
Yeah. Yeah. So self care is not always a fun activity sometimes, but it is a benefit. It's always a beneficial activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share with you some of the ones coming in here. For Steven, anything on the water is my happy place. Nice. So cute.
Yes.
And then Rider Coach Corner, no, not bloating, boating, sorry. Oh, so another water activity, boating. The office check can't come with me. Yes. Listen, that's another thing that I like to do sometimes, even though I feel myself twitching a little bit, is like disconnecting, unplugging. Then Katie's saying self
Digital.
care, reading. Yes, I just finished a book last night. So I'm making a practice to make sure I'm doing reading as well. Doing my podcast. Yes, so she's got her podcast about movies from the 90s and having my husband handle everything for me during that time and traveling and time with her friends. So that's great. Katie's got a great list, robust list. And
And a
Tora
good
is,
husband.
sorry, what'd you say, Randall?
I said, and a good husband.
And a good husband. Yes. He sure
Pushing me to
seems
do
like it
that.
from everything she says. They're so cute. Cycling with my riding group and pickleball for the wins keep me sane, says Tora. Hey, really nice. Yeah, I think I need to do something a bit more physical for my own self-care. I mean, I exercise, but need a little more than that. Seems also saying connecting with nature when I'm disconnected to everything else. Nice. Yeah, I appreciate that too. And I have to get prepared because winter's coming up here in the east coast of the United States, and I don't love the cold at all. So it makes going outside is hard for me. But beautiful. So we've got a great list of things that we can work in. I think you said this, but I don't 100% remember. But whenever we can establish physical boundaries too, of like this is the space where work is going to happen, but not over here. It is really helpful. And like Ben and I did was establishing those work hours and saying, okay, and one thing that I really like to use that's been helping me a lot more than I thought it would is an app called Flocus. I'll share
Hmm.
it with you guys. It's app at flocus.com and you can program it for different things, but it's basically a Pomodoro timer, but you can adjust it. You can connect it to your Spotify. It's free. The free version has some limitations, but having something like this with sounds come up on the screen is really has really helped me a lot. And then there are also ways that I take good care is using a tool like Insight Timer, which has meditations for every topic you can think of. I even looked up in preparation for today, how many are on here about boundaries? And there were a lot, a lot. I hadn't looked up boundaries before, but there's all the different topics are there. Oh, thank you so much, Katie, for putting it in the chat too. So Flocus, and there are other ones. I remember doing a video on my old YouTube channel about other ones as well that help with productivity and timing and focus. So Eden loves
I
reading, yoga, and shooting hoops.
You mentioned creating rituals, but that transition you between work and home. That may be if you do drive, something you do on the drive where you change hats. It may be what I do, shutting my electronics down so that they don't just pop open when I walk in the room. But creating rituals that transition you between work and home. And then another thing on the time part, because you mentioned that, um, give some consideration. And I know this is an area that not everybody can do, but when you reach a point, give some consideration to buying back some of your time, outsourcing some of your stuff, using automated tools for your content creation. If I spend $100 paying somebody to edit my video, I'm throwing that out there. I don't do that. I still edit my
Mm,
own. But if I pay $100 to have somebody edit my video and that saves me 4 hours, like a student at school in the media department, and that gives me 4 hours to go on a walk with my wife and hang out at the park and a picnic that I spend $10 on, right? That's the best $110 date I've ever, you know what I mean? I mean, it's, if you reframe it and it's not, I'm spending $100 to have somebody else edit my video, it's I'm spending $100 to spend time with the people I care about. And yes, one of the challenges to that is they probably will not, they'll probably only do it 80% as well as you do, right? And being okay with that, right? So yeah, apps and tools, buying your time back, definitely.
Okay. So here we go. Here's a comprehensive list. And what I'd like to do for everybody is I'd like to create an infographic, a document with these tips outlined and some more, including resources and links. And then I will send it over to Katie, and hopefully she'll be able to send it out in a follow-up email to our eCamp community so that you guys can have it. And then I'll also paste the link to it as a comment to this live stream for the future if you can come back to it. But love to be able to give it as a gift for you guys to reference in your own lives, to be able to take really good care of yourselves. But hopefully all of these ideas help you. And we'd love to stay connected with you guys. And for me, if you want to connect with me, you can go to bento.me/Tatiana Teaches. That shares you all of the things that I do, including eCamp for educators, including my events and things. Like I have a once a month get some work done. It's called a post-it session. Like it's just co-working to help each other. So that's on the last Thursday of the month. And then, eCamp for educators is coming up this Tuesday because it's the third Tuesday. It's 4 p.m. Eastern time. And then for you, Randel, you're inviting folks that they can connect with you if they have any follow-up questions at your email, randel@lifebydesignwellness.com. So we'd love
And
to
that's
stay
my
in touch.
website as well. That's my website as well, but it's down right now. We're having to figure it out and get it fixed. So it should be fixed in the next few days. So
Absolutely. And then are you in the eCam community on any one of those like Discord or Facebook?
I am in Discord, but I've got to work on getting more involved in that because I'm brand new to the Discord world.
Okay.
So
Yes, it does.
there's,
It does have a little bit of a learning curve, but and you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If you go here, you'll see all my socials and stuff to be able to stay connected. And what do you guys think? Is this something in like a few months from now that you would perhaps like to hear more about, be able to dive? Because there's a lot of stuff we skipped. Maybe let us know if this is valuable to you and you would like us to come on back in the future, and we can do a deeper dive into some of these topics. It's been such a pleasure to have you guys here today. Let's see if any other comments. Oh, Eden
been a
is saying
blast.
that she loves Insight Timer. And Steven, I'm blown away by the people co-working on Twitch running Pomodoro timers. Yeah, yes, right. Even just and I've seen them on YouTube as well. I even made one like co-work grade with me kind of a video too. So Katie's saying creating rituals that transition you between work and home. Yeah, I had a student do a persuasive speech on a Sunday reset, convincing students to really do a Sunday reset. So that's a nice ritual that could really help. I don't know if I said that Eden loves Insight Timer here. Paul is saying sometimes you have to buy your time. So he's agreeing with you on some of those points as well. So Mark is saying thank you. And then please do join the eCam community at the link that Paul put in the chat. And Katie is saying, we've got you, Randel, to help you get connected in Discord. And Mark Hoof is saying more. Yes. Okay. We got one vote for Mark. And Steven is saying absolutely as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time today being with us. We are at the end of our session time for today. Randel, I appreciate you, your insights, your time, your fabulousness, your wisdom, and also the fact that you are teaching counselors how to do this as well, to be there for people, for creators. So we hope that this has been valuable for you to help you protect your time and well-being and ultimately be able to contribute even more with your creative works. Randel, over to you.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure being here. And I would recommend a book called Boundaries. It does have a spiritual slant to it, but it's got a lot of practical information in it if you're wanting to work on it. And I just want to say I
You
enjoy
mean
being part
this
of this
one?
community. Yes, ma'am. There's also a workbook for that book. And so it's a pleasure being part of this community. One of the joys that I have is watching other people succeed and do well. And it's kind of, you get to see that all the time in the eCam community. So We talked a lot about accountability and, working together. Be part of the eCam community. And if you're not, jump in. It's kind of cool. I kind of enjoyed that eCam for educators. I learn a lot every time.
Oh, well, that makes me so happy to hear. And I will say, this is the book that got the process started for me a long time ago. It was a gift, and because it does have the spirituality element to it, I realize it may not be of interest to everybody, but there are so many other good books. And in our infographic follow-up document, I will definitely share tons of other resources that Randall has given me and that I've collected over time that are going to, including awesome New York Times articles and books and lots of different things that can help us. And I'll even link Insight Timer and some of the talks and meditations that are a part of that as well.
Hey, gang, start small. Don't try to change your whole world in one day. Start small. Start with one boundary.
Yes, absolutely. Start small, and that it's a continuous process. Now, I want to leave you guys with this really important quote. This to me, so powerful. There's nothing wrong with pleasing people. Just make sure that you're one of them. And that's something that I got. Jancy Dunn wrote an article, How to Set Boundaries When It Doesn't Come Naturally, in the New York Times. She was quoting another person when she said that, but that quote has stuck with me. There's nothing wrong with pleasing people. Just make sure that you're one of them. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us today, and I'll see you next time.